I've always said it's him and others like him. Most Malcolm is based mostly on the rather anonymous set of enforcers, as they were called, who, which makes them sound like the Dementors, who went out of Number 10 and fanned across Westminster and Whitehall and went into the ministries and told the ministers what to do and what to say and how much money they had and how to and when to toe the line and what would happen to them if they didn't. I think Alastair Campbell was perhaps the most public version of that, but the thick of it was really based on research that was really about the anonymous ones. The other thing I got researching was, I think it was just that sense of all these unelected, very young special advisors who were really coming up with policy, and that sense that we are being governed by we've been governed by. We say there's people in power who we voted for, but actually they're surrounded by these unelected officials who have enormous influence. And I was speaking to Alastair Campbell about has the office of Prime Minister, partly as a consequence of what Tony Blair was doing, as well as Cameron and Johnson, has the office of Prime Minister become too big and almost too presidential? Has power become more and more focused in Number 10 and less available within the ministries? And I think that's part of the problem of how politics works today. A prime minister elected with a healthy majority can do anything he or she likes, absolutely anything. And we saw that with Liz Truss. We saw it with every new prime minister who comes in, even though we didn't elect them, it was the Tory party members. They come in feeling that they can just change everything. And I think that is a consequence of what's been happening over the last 20 or 30 years, really, the centralizing of power in Number 10. I mean, my great political hero is Clement Attlee, one of the dullest politicians imaginable, but who achieved great change by basically trusting his cabinet, just allowing his cabinet, promoting rivals, but because he thought they were the best people for the job and telling them to get on with it, get on with starting a health service, get on with renewing the welfare state, get on with these things and empowering people. And it's interesting, I think what's happened over the last couple of years really is a very dry academic topic like devolution to local government has actually become quite a lively discussion now, because people are now thinking, yeah, we should have more power within our community and within our area and less concentrated within Westminster. So the taxes we pay in Plymouth should go towards services we get in Plymouth. Britain is one of the most centralized nations in the world, really, culturally as well as politically. Everything's in London. Power is, all the arts are, and I think people feel like that's why a lot of people outside London feel disconnected to what's going on. Even the building itself. I mean, I compare the Palace of Westminster with the Scottish Parliament. The Scottish Parliament is whatever your views are on the architecture, the Scottish Parliament is a very welcoming building. The public feel they can pop in and wander through it. It's a building that's used in the summer for various festivals and talks and discussions and so on. Westminster is full of barriers and walls and blockades and policemen outside, and it feels very much like it's saying, this is not for the likes of you. And so we feel that there is this kind of box into which the elite can go that we have no part of. I wonder whether last year was the year it kind of started to fall apart, in that there was a prime minister at the start of the year, Boris Johnson, remember him, and the parties, remember those, who did have a majority of 80, and yet somehow it didn't seem to function. And then we went through two more prime ministers, and I think it reached its apogee at the time of Liz Truss, where you were getting a prime minister, as I said, who felt that by being prime minister, they could do anything they liked. And the whole system just crumbled at the same time as, of course, the end of the Elizabethan era with the Queen dying. And this new sense, I think this new relationship we're having to work out with the monarchy and what it is, and of course the issues with Harry and so on. I think it genuinely was a year in which all those mainstays of our unwritten constitution that we just somehow muddle through will be beginning to unravel. And I think we're going to be dealing with it for the next 2 or 3 years. I think we don't quite know what we're going to make of the monarchy now, whether our feelings towards the monarchy was really our feelings towards Elizabeth as someone who was just always there. And now are we going to be much more critical and forensic in how we look at the monarchy? Is the office of Prime Minister fit for purpose? Is Westminster fit for purpose? What is the purpose of government? The whole pandemic and the furlough scheme has opened up a whole debate about what government is for. And just as the strikes are happening around us, is the country working? Or is it falling apart? Not just politically with devolution and independent referenda, but just the systems that we've so relied on for, from the time of Clement Attlee, the NHS, the welfare state, is it time to start again? I mean, I think a lot of huge questions were asked of the way Britain works last year, and it's going to take us some time to come up with the answers, as well as internationally, that the whole business of the war in Ukraine, which was taking us back to like the 1940s, images in the media that you thought you would never see this century. And then also global warming and the realization actually that it's upon us, time is running out, and actually there's now no room to shilly-shally and put things off. And yet if we have a non-functioning constitution, this is happening at the worst possible time. If you'd spoken to me about a year ago, I'd have been very pessimistic. Now I'm a little bit more optimistic, not so much for George Osborne's observation, but the fact that actually, Trump is on the wane. Bolsonaro was defeated. But we're seeing that actually you mustn't be complacent. I think there's a greater sense now that you've got to fight for democracy. You've got to keep renewing it, and relying on it being boring, I think, might reassure some people, but I think it will make a whole younger generation feel a little bit frustrated. I think you can have competent politics that's still exciting rather than boring. It can still be radical. It's about showing a kind of depth of imagination as well as competence and energy. And if it's not in one person, that's not a problem. If you can show that collectively, that's what you're offering. So I think there is, I'm much more hopeful than I was last year, but I'm also of the belief that it could turn again. Do you know what I mean? We mustn't be complacent. The fact that, someone in the government a year and a half ago stood up and said, yes, we are breaking international law, but only in a very limited way, and somehow feel that was normal. The Trump may be waning, but there's the new Trumps who are even more savvy and authoritarian coming up behind him. I think this is a battle that will be going on for the next 5 or 10 years, really. A little tiny thing that, and thankfully this was reversed last week, but deciding to privatize Channel 4 because you were just a bit annoyed with how Channel 4 News operates is the sign of a government that has become authoritarian. Now that was reversed last week. That was a hopeful sign. But the attacks on the BBC every time someone appears on the BBC who disagrees with a particular point of view that the government might hold. But I think it typifies a type of behaviour across politics where it's less about engaging and debating and more about imposing a point of view and muting an opposing point of view. That's for me is, I saw that in Scotland where various journalists were being shouted at for asking kind of perfectly reasonable questions. And it happened in the hustings for the Conservative leadership when various questions were put to the candidates by journalists. The journalists were booed. And that's something that Trump whipped up in his rallies when he was campaigning for president against CNN and so on. I find that, across the board, a very unsettling trend in politics. Well, I was always a huge Dickens fan, and actually, he's really, really funny, very funny. I think there's with the classics, people are over reverential, I think, and that's why people are put off. You're told that these are masterpieces, and if you don't think they're masterpieces from the word go, then there's something wrong with you. And it's not about that at all. Dickens was an entertainer. He just wanted to, he wanted to write about social issues, but he wanted to write them in an amusing and interesting and engaging way. And if you actually approach Dickens from that perspective, I wanted to write. David Copperfield is a fascinating novel. It's quite an interestingly psychologically rich novel about someone growing up not knowing whether they fit in and who they are, and whether he's getting through life normally or whether he's unusual, and so on. It felt very contemporary. So I wanted to make a film adaptation of that book that spoke to people today and presented London and Norfolk and the world that David inhabits in a much more fresh and colourful way, and not faded like it. Yes, it's set in 1840, but I don't want people to feel that that's the past. For the characters in the story, that's the present day. So therefore, they feel modern. So it should have that modern feel. Death of Stalin, was made at a time when I was thinking about these authoritarian governments like Putin and Berlusconi and Erdogan in Turkey. It was before Trump was even considered as a candidate for a president in America. And I was thinking about writing about a fictional dictator in the present day. And then this story was sent to me. It was a graphic novel about the death of Stalin. I knew the story, and I'm interested in that period, more about the music that was written in the period. And I thought, well, I don't have to invent anything. This all happened. This is all true. This reign of terror that Stalin imposed, so that, when he falls over and has a stroke, people are too afraid to interrupt him. They haven't heard from him through the night and the next morning. No one wants to be the first person to knock on the door because you might get shot. When they find him on the floor, they don't know what doctor to call, because if they send for the wrong doctor, they might get shot. That sense of fear that is starting to strangle everyone's kind of thinking and behavior. There's a kind of bizarre absurdity about it that I thought would make a good movie. When we were writing Alan, Steve becomes Alan. So it's almost like you're in the room with Alan all day. Because Steve has to stay in that character as we fire questions at him and things pop out. I saw Rishi Sunak being compared to Alan the other day because of his. Do you work in business yourself? When he was serving in a soup kitchen, that air of kind of trying to engage but being slightly socially inadept. So Steve and I, if we would meet up while not doing Alan, we would always speculate as to what Alan was up to now. Because Alan has evolved in real time. He's been going for about 25 years. So we've just seen him grow from a kind of rookie radio sports presenter to a primetime, entertainment host. And so we've always had a running kind of commentary in the back of our heads as to what Alan's up to at any given moment in time, really. It's really, this has been going, I've been doing this podcast now for a couple of years, via the New Statesman, and it really prompted by that sense that I think we all have, that something's going on in Westminster that is disconnected from everyone outside it. As we go through like 3 prime ministers in 3 months and actually feel outside the loop of what's going on. And also, I think just that developing sense over the last few decades, I think, of people not feeling that their views are being heard and represented. I kind of thought either, I can carry on saying the system's broken, how terrible, that's my job, thank you for, commissioning me to do another comedy about how broken the system is. I actually thought, no, I mean, democracy is important. It's important that it remains healthy. What can we do to look outside Westminster and see where the enthusiasm and the energy for trying to do something about politics is? So it's about that. It's about speaking to people outside the Westminster bubble, maybe local campaigners, protesters, local government,